So welcome everyone. Good afternoon if you're in Europe. Good morning, I guess, if you're somewhere overseas. Good night if you're somewhere else. This will be our regular webinar, which is about features in a new version that we're happy to release. It's this time Hume 2.13, and I hope it'll be interesting for you to see what we have in store for you. For you, this webinar will be run by me, Andre. I'm marketing director here at Graphivar, and with me here is, at least virtually, Esther, our director of product management, who will run you through all the new features that we have and also show you some live demo afterwards. Today's agenda, or what we have prepared for you, is some news in visualization, which is still the core feature of our Hume product. So we're always striving to make it easier for users to navigate visualization, even if they know a little code themselves or no code at all. We will have some news around alerts, which is now also becoming more useful and easier for users to set up and watch for anything important so they don't miss any important events. And finally, we will check what's new in Orchestra, which is the engine behind all the data manipulation, ingestion, unification, and basically what Hume is working on it. Then we have the live demo of all three sections, and we will finish with questions and answers by Esther. So with this, I'll leave you with Esther to guide you through what's new in Hume 2.13.
Thank you for the introduction, Andra. That was very nice. So thank you all for joining. I'm really happy to announce this release. It brings a lot of great new things to Hume. And I want to start with visualization. As Andra said, it's where most users work most. So we always try to add with each release a lot of value to the visualization area in Hume. Here's an overview. And since you read faster than I speak, you already glanced over it. And I move to the next slide because there are more details on each of those things. Yeah. So what we have here as a first thing, it's all around navigation. How can you navigate faster? How can you, when you analyze data in the visualization, move quicker to where you want to be? And one thing there is, you all know the situation where you have lots of notes on the screen and you know that you want to look closer at one that is maybe in the upper left corner, right? So you click it and then you might have to zoom in on it and use your mouse or something. We now have a feature where you either right click or you use the toolbar on the right side to zoom in and see directly, go directly very quickly to this node. A small thing, but it makes life better, I think. You also know our double click, that you can double click a node and then you can, depending on what the configuration is, something happens, maybe it expands or so. We got a feedback from many users that sometimes they don't want anything to happen. So now you can configure the double click so nothing happens when you double click. Yeah. I think this is, I just wanted to mention these two things. They are small, but for you as who administer Hume or use it frequently, it's quite important to know. Then we come over to the next section. And before we get started here, actually, we wanted to ask you something. So, Andra, if you could launch our questionnaire, our one and only questionnaire, or poll of this webinar.
Launching now. Okay, you guys should see it.
So you see it's about Cypher, and if you could answer the question of how many users are familiar with Cypher in your organization, and then you have three choices. Okay, so do we have some answers?
Yes, we have, and I can show it now. Okay, so looks like this.
Yeah, good. Okay, so this is why we built the things that we're going to show you now. Usually, and the results of this poll are very representative to what we know about the organizations that use Hume and Neo4j in general. Not so many people know Cypher usually, right? So to navigate a graph, to query a graph, to traverse it is very difficult for users that don't know Cypher. So we want to make Hume more available for this big percentage of users that don't write Cypher. And that we call the feature Advanced Expand. It has been released last year, and this year, or last autumn, November, I think. And now we are adding bit by bit more functionality to it. One of it is that you can start Advanced Expand directly from the schema overview. So not just from a node, but from a class. So when you don't know the data set much, you can say, okay, here's the class, for example, person. Now I want to build a query and I want to traverse the graph from the very high top level. Then there is a non-direction option, which makes a lot of sense for directions that goes both ways. One example is that if you're married, the other person is hopefully also married to you. So you don't want to have a direction in that, or you want to have both directions in that relationship. Or if somebody knows someone, right? And you can take it that the other person knows that person too. We can also, when you start from a specific node, let's say a specific person, and you have, let's say, 30 relationship types in your schema. You don't want to see all relationship types. You only want to see the ones that apply to this node. We have that now as well. You can build very complex filters now. You can actually build them so complex that I couldn't even cover all the functionality in my demo, because it can go really detailed into the filtering options. And then once you did all that, you built a nice path visually, you set the filters, you expand to the canvas, and you can see everything in the visualization. And then you want to go back and change something, we make that possible now as well. So the query is saved. Okay. This is for all those users that don't know Cypher so well. And now comes something that is actually, first we thought, oh yeah, but this is for users that know Cypher quite well, right? You build a path, and of course what happens in the background is that Cypher query is formed. So what we do now is that we bring the Cypher query up for users to see. And while developing it, we realized that it's actually really, really good for users that don't know Cypher so well, because they can copy it and use it on different places. So first we thought, well, could be great for admins and so on, because they can verify their queries and so on. But it's very good for people that don't know Cypher as well. Another thing that we realized was that when you train people in Cypher query language, it's pretty cool, because they can try things out, building them visually, and then verify in the code if they did correct, So it's a bit of a guidance also when people learn. So, we are very big fans of the feature at Graphware, especially me. I'm going to show you that as well in a demo. And I think with that, we already go over to alerts. And, we launched alerts a little bit more than a year ago. And it was launched as a way of keeping up to date on data changes. So you created a pattern that would scan next data for changes and everything that comes in new. What we added with this release is that you can also run the pattern against existing data. So you have your data set, you create a pattern and alert, and then you look at everything that is already in the data, not just for changes. So that's very nice, especially if you don't want to spend so much time analyzing a data set manually. You can instead create a query and create a pattern and run an alert instead. Connected to that is we call it here update pattern without, sorry, I'm on the overview page. I'm going to go to the details page. So this is what I just told you about the existing data, right? It's an option in the alert now, and I'm going to show you in the demo as well. Then we have the updating patterns without losing the previous state. So let's say you have a pattern that detects changes in data, upcoming changes, new changes. All changes are new. So a pattern that detects changes. Then you need to change something in the pattern. So you pause the alert or you disable the alert for a certain amount of time. Let's say that's an hour. And then you want to switch it on again. You don't want to lose anything that happened during that hour, right? So what we do now is to give you the option to either start from a clean slate or to start on the last state. Yeah. And the important part here is that you can decide, because sometimes you don't care about this 1 hour, the events that can happen there. And sometimes, it might even be too many events, or you're just testing or so, and then you just don't want this long list of things that happened. And sometimes it's really important that nothing gets lost. So here you have the chance now. Okay, then the actions per alert. I don't know if you tried it out yet, but once you executed the patterns, you found events that match this the pattern in the data. So you found something that you want to look at closer. You, of course, if it's graphy data, want to look at it in the visualization. So from the events in Hume, you go into the visualization, and then what, right? Usually you want to analyze data in a context, and the context can best be transported with an action. So it's possible to say, I want these actions to be specific for alerting events. So you don't have such a long list of actions, right? But now what you can do as well is that you say, for this pattern, I only want to have this amount of actions, let's say 3 or so. And that makes it much easier for the end user to choose which action they want to apply when they analyze the data set. Or sorry, when they analyze an event. All this will make more sense to you when I show you in the demo in just a bit. With that, we already come to Orchestra. You have here the overview, and I can tell you that it's a lot about, we have new components, and we make it a bit easier to troubleshoot. So let me go into the details. When it comes to troubleshooting, you open Orchestra, the first thing you see is the list of all workflows. And so far, there wasn't so much information on the let's say, state of those workflows, right? You knew that they were enabled, but you didn't know if they're running in a way that you expect them to. We wanted to give you some indication, and that now is done by the number of messages per workflow and the latest time that these were sent. So you can understand if there's something is stuck or something doesn't work on the first view. Then we implemented a retry option. Yeah, so let's say you work with a API and you want to call it API, you can define how often it should be retried in case of a 500 error. And the global metrics on the messages sent and so on are now also available after you restart Orchestra. Not sure how often you do that, but just in case, we offer some more consistency. Yeah, good. The configuration. Orchestra gives so many options to configure workflows, and we want to make it very convenient for you to do that. So the first thing we did now was to create a new version of the generic enricher. And I want to mention here that now you have generic enricher HTTP version 1 and version 2. And please, when you start workflows now, use version 2, because version 1 will be retired in 18 months. Yeah, so we're going to sunset it, and until then, if you have existing workflows, please switch to the new version. Many good reasons to do that. I'll show you in a bit why. For all of you that work in the ecosystem, when you work with Orchestra, you also work with the ecosystem, and you know that you can create variables there, for example, for a password. Before, there was no consistency between the variable in Orchestra or the variable in the ecosystem and maybe a password that you need to use in Orchestra. Now you can reuse the same variable that you defined in the ecosystem in Orchestra as well. And now the last thing I want to mention is that we created a trigger component that lets you run a workflow once and only once. Yeah, good. So I think you're going to see why you need that in a demo. And talking about that, I would move over to the demo. Yeah, Ondra, do you think it's a good time for the demo?
This is a very good time for demo. So everybody's excited to see the features live. Let's launch Hume and see how it looks like.
Yeah, I'm gonna change the screens that I share, and I also, you see Hume now, right? No, not yet.
Not yet.
Okay, now you do.
Now we do.
And what you see is a wonderful schema overview of a graph. Good, good. Then we are at the right point here. And now I'd like to, just give me a second, do something more. Now I destroyed the sharing. It's only a question of a few hours. I try again. Here we go.
Okay. Yep, we see it.
And then we just show that. And then I would like to have another thing. My other screen, I'm going to switch off the camera so you don't, you can completely focus on the demo. You don't need to see me. Good. So, as I said, you see the feature over the schema overview of the graph that I want to do the first part of the demo with. And just to give you some context, it's a graph about people, objects, locations, and events. If you are a true Neo4j nerd, you know it already. It's a Neo4j data set. And what we're going to talk about today in the demo is a person that might be a party to a crime. The crime might happen at a certain location. The person also has an address and location. The crime can be about a vehicle, yeah? And the person has phone calls and calls people. And then people know each other, of course, right? So this is a little bit the background of what we do, what we talk about today. Now, let's assume that I have never seen this data set before. I have no idea about what's happening here. And I'm landing at a schema overview. With the new option in Advanced Expand to build a query right from the schema overview, I can start from here and then build my query, from the highest possible level without knowing anything. So I see now all the possible relationships for this class. And you see here that for no's, I can say it's either incoming or outgoing. I don't think that makes so much sense. So I think any direction is much better if I want to know who knows whom, right? This person shouldn't be any person. It should be a person that has been a party to a crime. And I would like the crime to be connected to a location. And now I can build a few filters to focus my search because the data set is quite big. The crime can have a type, and I would like the type to be about a vehicle. And so it's going to be the type is going to be vehicle crime. And then I can add a condition, and I want to end condition, not to or. And I could add as many conditions as I want. But I told you before, the options here are so good, they overcome my need for the demo actually. So another thing I want for the crime to be the last outcome. I want them to not be solved. So I want them to have no suspect or not be solved. So I make it quite wide. I say the last outcome should contain a no. And then when it comes to the location, I want to show you one thing more here. I could now add another group, right? So you could have this condition and then have a full group of another condition in either and or, yeah? But I want to keep it a little bit more simple today, so let's not go into that. Now the location, I would like to have the postcode that starts with the area that I'm interested in. There the postcode starts with BL. I think that's what I want to see. So let's expand it to the graph. Let's see what happens. So you see everything is added new to the graph, and I see that there's a lot of stuff around here. I'm not going to start with that. I want to start with something that seems a bit more manageable, just to, for an easy start of the day. I want to look at this node closer. So now you see I selected it, and now I can use the new feature of zoom to selection either from here or from here, depending on where you think it's more comfortable. And I get directly to this person, Billy Moore. Good. So now I can start. I see who Billy Moore knows, and we know that he has been involved in a crime that has happened in this address, in the area that I'm interested in. Now what I would really like to do now, my goal with the next steps is to create an alert that alerts me about the connections of Billy Moore. Yeah. Now I don't know Cypher. That's not a joke. I've been in photography for such a long time, and still my Cypher skills are still rudimentary. So I'm going in, sorry for that, and check I check a little bit around Billy Moore's phone. Yeah. I built a path that involves his phone, the calls that he receives, the calls that he makes to the people that own those phones. So this is quite a path, right? I have no idea how I would write a cipher and how I should monitor that. If I now expand it to the graph, I can check if it returns the results that I would expect. Let me test it. Yeah, that looks interesting. I mean, it looks like it returns what I want to know. And what I find most interesting here is that Billy Moore actually seems to not to call so much, right? And it would be nice if I could monitor it in the future. So to see if he makes new phone calls and has new acquaintances. So what I'm going to do now is that I go back, and you see here that now my query is still there. And I can go here and say display cipher. And now I just want to show you something that I think is really nice. If you add something to the query, it's also added to cipher. I think that's really nice. I didn't need that part. I just want that part. So I copy the cipher query from here. I can expand it again. And then I'm going to build an alert from that. Yeah. Let me go to alerting. You see here we are now in the same knowledge graph in the alerting section. And what I'm going to do is that I create a pattern. So it's about monitoring Moore's calls. And then I put a little description, all incoming and outgoing calls. So the nice thing is now that I can reuse that cipher query. And the only thing that I need to do is to add a key, because alerting always needs a key in the return phrase, right? So we can add that. And then this pattern will work and should work nicely. Let's see, we can test it in a bit. Later, we want changes for new results. The data source is the poll demo data source, then we have the main perspective. And now here comes something that I want to show you, those associated, can't say that, actions. As I said, this is important when you want to expand the event later in the graph. And I wanted to show you where they come from, right? They show up here, but why do they show up? It's something that we released in 2.12. In actions, a new scope of actions was added. So the global actions, the local actions and all that. We also added the action type event. And here you see it's also 3. And let's look at, for example, at the connected criminals, you see that we have the scope event, yeah, and then return type graph and so on. So here's why they show up in my pattern. But for the pattern, it doesn't matter at all which friend had a car stolen. I'm not interested in that. For this pattern, the event types for that never gonna care about stolen cars. Okay. And then I want this pattern to be executed every 30 seconds. I can test it with my wonderful cipher query that I created myself. Everything works nice and fine. Very good. I have this now, so I can create an alert. Good. Let's say calls. It's not only by, right? It's everybody's calls. Let's call it also monitoring, be more. And then we have this pattern. This is what is defined in the pattern. And now resume from previous execution doesn't make sense to us because there is none. I'm going to disable it for now. But I want to generate events from the current state of data. And now, I already investigated via advanced expand. If I wouldn't have done that, it would be really nice because I would get these results without even ever moving a finger. But now I'm going to use this option just to verify that everything works as expected. I'm going to get an email notification. Let's say we call it monitoring, something like that. And then I want to be notified immediately and not just later. Yeah, I want to know exactly when the event comes. I save and directly enable the alert. And now, because it's executed right away against the existing data set, I already, against the existing data, I already have an event now. So here you see it's the same path, which is nice. It verifies that my query works correctly and all. So you see Virginia and the connection between Billy with the phone calls. Now you can see here, I can apply an action when I when I go to the canvas and investigate that. So I choose show connected criminals. And when I expand now, you're going to see that first the data is loaded and then the action is applied. And that saves, of course, a lot of time, right? Yeah. Another thing that I could show you here is if you like to see things in their geospatial context. It makes limited sense in a demo, so excuse me for that. But you know, let's say you would like to see the address of the crimes. Oh, sorry. If a person lives at the same place where the crime occurred, you can choose that, and then you can open it in a map view. And if we then say expand to canvas, you're going to have a beautiful map here, and that's why I say it makes limited sense. All the events are kind of located in the same area. So yeah, but I still wanted to show you. Okay, so this was the alerting part. And usually I would ask, do you have questions? But please keep your questions to the end because I would like to show you the orchestra features that we added as well. So please jump with me now to a different context. For Orchestra, we have a different knowledge graph that we want to show you the new features. And there we have the airport, and it's about airports and the weather at the airports. Yeah, because we want to show you the generic HTTP enricher. It's nice, so it's something that really has live streaming data. Good. So you all know this overview page here. And as I said, you know, let's say I start a workflow, then, you know, there's this column now with messages. And when I refresh, I'm going to see the number of messages and the last time they ran. Yeah. And you can refresh that and see how it goes. And when you go in here, you will also see it up here. I stopped the workflow now because it's better for me to demo when it's stopped. And I also want to show you something else first before we go to the weather forecast. You know, I told you it's the knowledge graph is about airports and the weather there. So we needed to get airports into a knowledge graph. What we did was that we set up a workflow that only had to run once because we wanted to ingest workflows from a location here. It's a typical case where this new component, the trigger component, comes into play. And I used our nice little description feature here to show you what this component is about. So the component starts the workflow once, and that helps you, you know, to, for example, in this case, when you only want to ingest once and then stop it again. And here's also the stop workflow component, right? They come together. You don't have to have this whole, you know, Orchestra is really designed to stream data the whole time, right? It's a workflow orchestration tool. So if for the specific use case where you really just want to run it once and then stop it without having to monitor everything and stop it manually, this is why we did that. One use case is that you want to ingest things only once. The other one is that you want to test and you don't want to overload the system with too much data during the testing. Good. So this is the, you know, the component is very simple. It's just when do you want to start it? Maybe there's a delay and to store the latest messages or not. Yeah. Okay. Good. Trigger component. That was that. Now let's go to the weather forecast workflow, where we want to show you the new generic enricher. You see here we start with a Neo4j reader, and that's of course because, you know, we have all the airports now in Neo4j, right? We wrote them in there with the previous workflow that I showed you. Then there's a throttle component. We released that in 2.12. I'm not sure how familiar you are with it yet. The throttle component is really nice because it allows you to reduce the throughput, and it works well together with the generic enricher. Let's say if you have rate limits for an external API that you want to query with the external enricher. So it controls the message rate for the upstream components. And you see here that you can set a request limit, and you can also limit this the reset period. Yeah, so that's the throttle component, and it comes right before the generic enricher. And I want to show you here that we have two weather forecast providers. One is called M3O, and the other is OpenMeteor. Let's start with this one. You see here, looks a little different from before, the version 2. The first thing we did was to make this sheet a bit more user-friendly. Look, you can now see the whole URI. You couldn't before, it just was one long line, a little bit hard to use. The main thing that we wanted to fix with this new version was that it wasn't that we wanted to give you more, fine control over what's sent in the body. Before, everything was sent by default, the whole message. Now you can either say, I want to send the full message, okay? Or you can say, okay, I want to send some parameters. In our case, you want to get the forecast for 2 days, and the location should be the city. So we send that with the body. And then the request headers can also be defined. Yeah. Another thing important here. So we are querying an API, right? Maybe sometimes 500 errors returned and we can't execute the query. We have a retry policy for that now. So you don't have to sit there, monitor and wait, right? You can have it enabled, and then, if you always want to retry, but you can also say, I want to have a maximum number of retries. There should be a delay between the retries, and I want to use an exponential backoff. So with that, you can, say, between the retries, I want to have this backoff, and it can be multiplied by 2 exponentially, and you have this this delay in milliseconds. Good. So let's look what happens with the messages, what happens to our weather forecast. Here you can see in the enriched area that we have the forecast here, and we have day 1, day 0 and day 1, today and tomorrow. And here you can see the different temperature values, sunset, sunrise, and so on. It's the same for day 1. Good. The other service that we call works a little different. Here we defined the parameters only in the request parameters, not in the body. And that works equally well. If you go to the messages here, you're going to see that we have the enriched section here, and this one sends hourly information, and quite detailed here. Yeah, for example, in the temperature, you can see per hour the average temperature. Okay, how does that look? We then, of course, transform it and write it into Neo4j, and then it's available here. So let me see. I'm in Amsterdam today, so let's look at Schiphol and the weather forecast for here. And I think one might be a little older from Friday, but then we have the one from today. And you can see here the maximum wind and the maximum temperature, and the same here, but it was for Friday. So here for today. Yeah. Good. I think this is pretty much what I wanted to show you for Orchestra. And with this also, that is the end of the demo. I just realized I missed something in alerting. So if you can make the jump with me, I'm going to go back in alerts and want to show you the last feature here. Remember, in the alert that I defined here, I said I want to generate events from the current state of data. I first now change. I changed this, yeah, because from now on, no, I need to disable first. Sorry. So first I changed this here so I don't lose anything when I work on it, but it's disabled. And the next time I disable it, and then I start generating events for new data, for changes in data, for new things that come in, and that's that. So that was one more feature that we added, and I missed it in the demo flow, but now you saw it. Good. With this, I think I can hand over back to Ondra, who wants to open the floor up for questions and answers, right, Ondra?
Exactly. So first of all, thank you, Esther, for the nice product demo. And now to the questions and answers. We have a few questions, but it is also up for any of you guys, if you want to ask anything more, use the dedicated Q&A button. And stereo, yeah, show the slides. Cool. So first question goes back to the advanced expand. And the question is, if we do this from the schema, can we use actually multiple nodes, or in the case of schema classes, as a starting point?
So you need to start with one class, but then in the path, of course, you can add all the other classes, but the starting point has to be one. I'm not sure how it would work if there would be, I would need to think that through, the use case for that. I think the person that asked the question, I would really welcome if you could take the time to go to our idea portal and write down this idea. I think it's very interesting, and please write down what you would use it for, your use case. I'm very interested in that.
Okay, we have another question, which now brings us to actions. And one of the actions is to export stuff to CSV files. Are we able to close off this possibility for users, so they are not allowed to export stuff to CSV, while keeping them, let them be able to use other features and actions?
So we have quite detailed permission settings in Hume, but if we look apart from the permission settings, you can restrict the access to actions. So it is possible to say, I have a perspective here, and these users should have access to this perspective, and they see action X to Z, but they can't see A to X. Yeah. And that way you can prevent people from using certain actions.
Okay, so we can prevent them from creating their own actions, and we can also prevent them from using the actions we don't want them to use.
Yeah.
Okay. And then we have one more about this, the orchestra and the triggers. There's this one-off trigger. And could you describe a bit more what's the use case for the one-off trigger in orchestra workflows?
Yeah, I know it seems a bit counterintuitive, because it's we generally want things to flow in orchestra. I think the example in the demo was quite clear. We just wanted to bring all the airports in at once, and then we also loaded all locations once and so on. But otherwise, our data scientist team, they came to us as well, and they said, often we test workflows, and we have the data that we ingest is a lot. It's massive, right? So if we test if everything works, we start the workflow, and then it runs, and before we don't really see when it ends and when it starts again, right? This flow, it's very hard for us to know when we should stop it if we just want it once. And to make this testing case easier, that's another use case for it.
Okay, we have 1 more minute, so I'll steal this one. And I have a question for you, Esther. What's your favorite feature in Hume 2.13? What's your most excited about?
Ever since we had to release, I'm in complete heaven because of Advanced Expand. I just love the Cypher query. It really helps me, to see and copy the Cypher query. That's just fantastic. It helps me also because I still learn Cypher. So for now, finally, I add a node, I see what happens in the query, and I can understand much better. So it's my absolute favorite.
Me too. So I'm also, have to say I'm struggling with Cypher. So having visual tools to help me with it, that's amazing. So thank you very much. Thanks everyone who participated. If you want to ask any more questions, fire up at us. Use the idea portal if you have any use cases you want us to go through. And thank you. And thanks, Esther, for the very nice demo.